It's week 3 of VCT. We're going to go over Pacific, EMEA, and America's Pickems. We're going to see how this game and how this week has set up the stage for playoffs and how this previous week has kind of determined the outline of how these teams have generally looked. So for Vero and DFM, I think DFM isn't really the team that I thought was going to go into the stage and be competitive against a Paper X, be competitive against KRX, but that just hasn't been the case. The team seems a little bit dysfunctional. They kind of lack an identity. They lack, one thing I mentioned in the previous video is like a lot of these teams that are in the middle of the pack, which I consider DFM, even though they haven't won a game this stage, is that they generally have a home map. And for the previous meta, that was Pearl. They would always pick Pearl, just like a crew in Americas. They would always pick a map. And in this case, crew was their Lotus. For DFM, they no longer have a Pearl. In terms of a series, in these middle of the pack teams, they will have a map, but they generally have a hard time closing out a series. So if it goes to 3 maps, I generally tend to lean towards Vero. And for this game against DFM, I think it sets a really good stage and it really prepares them for their next game in the following week, which is KRX, which we'll get into. But for now I'm going to pick Vero. I personally believe that the way that Foxy9 has revived this team, it really shows that they can potentially go on an auction run. I don't think they would be as dominant in terms of like, if they show up on an international stage, they won't be, Nongshim quality, but I think they can go on the run, the same run as Nongshim, where they end up making, pretty much they have to make top 2. And given that they set the stage, they've gotten 2-0, they haven't lost yet. If they keep on winning, they'll just kind of drive this momentum, and from there, they can potentially make champs, which would be an incredible feat for a team that hasn't won in their first game until literally this past 2 weeks. The next game, Full Sense versus Zeta, I think it's a no-brainer. Full Sense beat Zeta. They bounced back against a pretty crushing loss against GE. Like, GE, throughout that whole game, like, honestly, if I'm being blunt with you, it was completely boring. Like, there was no fight in Full Sense. There was no competitive. There was no back and forth. There was no, chipping at each other where, Primi is the duelist, the guy that's, if anybody says, oh, this is their team, it's Primi. And Primi didn't even have any, really flashes of him carrying the team. He had a really incredible 4K that turned into a 1v5 ace, but it wasn't enough to drive the momentum to be like, hey guys, I'll put you on my back for a couple rounds or maybe even on the map. But that wasn't even the case. Like, the whole team looked flat. And so this is their bounce back game against the Zeta that looks pretty promising. I think they end up beating an RRQ that is kind of a little fell flat. They've gone from a top 4 team in Pacific at one point to now maybe even entering the bottom tier. It's been looking really bad for RRQ, at least in their previous game against Zeta. And so this isn't a guaranteed lock though. I think that even though I pick it pretty quickly, I think this just makes sense, as in Full Sense has to be a top 4 team. If they lose this game against Zeta, then I think it's pretty doomer. And considering the fact that they would pretty much have to go into play-ins, and it's pretty much no question that they wouldn't make it if they lose this game against Zeta, because they beat Nongshim, they lose to GE, and then they have 3 more games. Considering the fact they play a hot Gen G, and they could probably, it isn't a full lock on RRQ, I think this should be the game that Full Sense wins for sure, without a doubt. And so for Team Secret, Paper X, I think this would probably end up being the same way that KRX and Paper X, which was last week's game. I think it'll end up being the same way, where Paper X pretty much just flat out stomp Team Secret. That does have promises. I think they do have the firepower to be able to shoot back, but I think Paper X's game plans, their experience, not only would Paper X have to have a bad day, but Team Secret would have to be on. They would have to be online. They would have to be shooting for it to be competitive in a 3rd map scenario. Genji, GE, I think this would be the match of the week. I think this is pretty telling of how these teams will shape out, just given that GE have shown really great promises. I think they've been one of the top teams until they ran into Nongshim. And going into that series, it seemed like GE was pretty much the favorite. I think they kind of dropped the ball towards, the last map, where it just wasn't that convincing that they would be, able to close it out in a 3rd map. Once it got to the 3rd map, it seemed like Nongshim were just kind of tiring them out, and GE were ready for the constant 3-map aggression that Nongshim were not only to be able to provide, but Nongshim also provided new comps. They added in the Yoru, and not only that, but Francis has been IGLing this whole stage, and so not only is Nongshim kind of building up for a potential run, because they're most likely not going to be able to clinch a playoff spot, it just seems like Global needed this game to kind of prove themselves as a potential playoff contender, as in the top 2 teams in the stage. It's still possible, but that previous game against Nongshim would have for sure showed that, okay, this is a top 2 contender. So now this game leaves them in question. If they beat a Gen G, then that allows them to continue the path of being the top team. And so I'm gonna go with GE. Okay, so T1 DFM, I think T1 are favored in this game DFM, I think, could personally try to upset T1, but I think T1 with their form, they're going to be polished probably by the time playoffs hit, or if they make the plans, they'll definitely make it into playoffs regardless of where they show. DFM have been pretty mediocre. They have a chance to be able to upset, but given the fact that they play a double in week 3, it seems very unlikely against a T1 that only has 1 game. Full sense, they're playing a double. RQ has a chance to upset. They have the chance to be able to get their first win after some really rough showings. I mean, RQ has not been looking great, and it's been this whole stage. And even in the previous stage, RQ just hasn't been able to get across the line when they need to, given the fact that they've had roster changes and player illness. It just seems like full sense, if they're able to get their, their belongings together and get back to the form that they were in their previous stage, and I think this is a clear lock for full sense. Varel versus DRX, I think this is very important for DRX, considering the fact that they haven't had a great showing themselves, and they don't seem like a lock for playoffs. They can potentially get bounced in the plans, and I think this win against a Varel that's been streaking, they're pretty much undefeated, and if they beat DFM, they'd continue to be undefeated, and if they were able to stop the train, and considering the fact that they started at this stage on a gamble running triple duelist, and Varel has been, the team that has been led by Foxy9. Even though he's not playing the duelist, he has been a cornerstone for Varel. And for KRX to be able to stop that, then that shows that they can bounce back and be able to flip things around and potentially make a run for champs. This game is probably going to go under the radar just because I think as we look at GE and Gen G as the match of the week, I think this would be a second match of the week, as this could be the pivot point for either of these teams. I would go with Varel, but I think DRX have to use this game as a bounce back game to be able to springboard into potentially making a run for playoffs. I think Nongshim with their last game versus GE is their springboard game, just like how I mentioned Varel versus DRX. That's a springboard game. That game versus GE, that was Nongshim's spring back game, where Nongshim lock in as much points as they can and be able to clinch a spot in champs, and so that they can, be able to play in that. For Zeta, I think they look good, but I just think they can't compete with the top 6 teams in Pacific. And yes, they end up beating an RQ, but I don't think RQ have been showing any great signs of returning to their form as they once were. And Nongshim, they are one of the top 6 teams, and so by default, it's automatic lock. Okay, week 3 for EMEA, it's a really condensed week, and so there is a lot of games jam-packed within 3 weeks. Whereas Americas and Pacific, we're going to 4 or 5 weeks. This is the last week for EMEA. We're going to go into play-ins and then into playoffs. And so quickly, we're going to go over the Pickems and then jump into Americas. So for GX, Team Liquid, I think I'm really high on Team Liquid. GX showed really great form, and this could potentially be a pivot game and a bounce-back game for them to be able to make a showing and be able to get a higher seeding in play-ins. Considering that GX are 1-2 and Team Liquid is 2-1, this could flip the tides for either of the team. Team Liquid, I think, are in a spot to be able to go on a run, but overall, long-term wise, I don't really feel high on Liquid. I think given the game plan that I've seen, I think that Team Liquid could potentially be bounced in playoffs. Team Vitality versus Gentlemates, I think Gentlemates are the underdog in this game, but I think they have shown a lot of great things, and they have the chance to be able to regain their top form. They have a chance to be able to regain their top tier form in kickoff, where they entered the international as the first seed. Avid versus Pacific, I think Pacific have been looking great. They've been looking better, but not enough to be able to compete and maybe even potentially win a game. And that's pretty sad to say. I think they may win a game in play-in, but given that Navi have been struggling as well, they have a chance to upset, but I don't think this is the game for them to be able to win. I'm rooting for them. I really want them to be able to get their win and succeed, but I think Navi have shown enough to be able to maybe even win in a 2-0 fashion. Eternal Fire versus Fnatic, I think Eternal Fire have been looking really low. I was pretty high on them. I predicted them for them to be able to make champs, given the fact that they haven't been anywhere near the form that they have in stage 1, where they potentially were a game away versus Team Heretics to be able to make it into international, their first international. They just have not been anywhere near that form. And so I'm very critical of them. I think they need to find something in order for them to bounce back and be able to compete as one of the top 4 teams in EMEA. Whereas Fnatic, they come off a loss against Liquid, and they kind of look pretty rough. They don't have a home map. They don't have a Haven or a Lotus that looks really strong for them. They just kind of look like a team that's good to decent on each map, and that's kind of odd to say, just given the fact that Fnatic has always been one of the top teams in EMEA. They've always been in internationals, and it's fair to say that I don't think that it's fair to say that they may not make it, and it's not what a lot of Fnatic fans want to hear, but it's pretty much the truth. They add a new roster change, and it seems like they can platform, they can be able to spring off of it, but they just haven't done that. And yes, it may take time, but given the fact that they play a double in this, it can be pretty concerning on how they end up either qualifying to playoffs or having to play in the play-ins. And so with that said, I think Return of Fire have been in way lower form, have not been anywhere near consistent as they once were, and so Fnatic win this game. BBL versus Gentlemates, I think Gentlemates, again, show that they are a top 14, whereas VBL are competing back for that spot. I think they've shown a really great signs, and with Lovers Rock picking up the Yoru again, it shows that they may have a chance. They may have adapted to the new meta and pretty much may be able to dominate EMEA again. But personally, if we're picking up Yoru again, and if Gentlemates have their hands on it, then who better than Martin to be able to pick that up? Because we all know that Martin has been one of the best players to be able to play this whole year. He's been putting up amazing stats. And so if they put their hands on the Yoru and they evolve and adapt with the meta, or even if he stays on the Phoenix and has a really great game, I think that they can be one of the top teams again. I think I'm so incredibly down on Team Heretics just because that their form that they had with Mini Boo and Wu as the initiator, and when Mini Boo just diving in, they had an identity. They were kind of throwing Mini Boo into the wolves. And sometimes he would thrive, sometimes he would not, which led to Mini Boo being the scapegoat, kind of the product of the system. But that's the way they played. That's the way that they thrived on. That's the way that they got to so many internationals. But given that the fact that they kind of have changed their identity, they were really thriving with the Neon, but that didn't allow them to prosper when it came to Masters London, which led to them falling out, not even able to get a win. And so in this stage, I think it's important for Team Heretics to be able to build back up and be able to show that they can be able to be a top tender international team, not just the EMEA team, but again, a really top contender, dangerous international team. I think personally, if we're thinking about ceilings, Team Heretics ceilings is way lower than the ones they were back when they were competing against Kong and Champs. And so I'm gonna pick GX against Team Heretics again. This game is gonna go on the radar, and I think it should be one of the games that you should watch, as it determines a lot about these team seasons. I'm gonna be honest, Foot has disappointed me. I think that they initially started the stage in a 2-0 loss against a Navi that looks pretty shaky right now. But after the game against Navi, they end up beating a Gentlemates, a Pacific, and a BBL. And so that brings a lot of questions about their form. Were they playing down to Navi's levels? Was Navi having a great showing in the beginning? There's so many questions, but I think, again, I'm personally pretty high on Foot. I expect them to be able to make chance. And so by winning this game, that allows them to show that they are a top 2 team. They beat Vitality, and Vitality, if they beat Vitality pretty convincingly, then that establishes them as a top 2 team and establishes them being able to clinch it into playoffs. And then KC versus Team Liquid, I think this is the match of the week. I think that Carmine Corp has been showing really great synergy, really great game plans, really great micro, and really great comms. I know that there's a lot of examples of the team coming up with ideas but not really clashing. There's been other examples in other regions where people are constantly throwing out ideas, and that can be a lot of information and a lot of chaos to be able to handle while there's already chaos going on in the server. I feel like I'm so impressed by how KC have been able to navigate the coaching chains and how they've really stuck with this roster and relied on the strengths. They've been leaning into a lot of comfort with their agent picks and a lot of pretty simple, they've been relying on a lot of simple, not too complex ideas. They say, hey, I'm gonna take space here. Oh, hey, hey, let's swing this angle together. It's a lot of simple things. We don't have to make it too complicated. It's a video game. It's a 5v5. Like, just play numbers. Just play with the simple plan. Play with confidence. And I feel like that's what KC embodies. And for them to be able to win this game against Team Liquid that have kind of shown a similar sense of their playstyle, a little bit of a aggro aggression, but also tempered and a little bit balanced. They're probably one of the more aggressive teams, but not as much as like a Foot or a BBL. And so KC end up winning this game. I think Team Liquid have shown a good showing. I think that a lot of what I mentioned before is that overall Team Liquid good in the short term, but in the long term is what I'm a lot more concerned about. For this game, Carmine Corp win. BBL versus Pacific, I think it's not a favorable matchup. They were pretty close in their previous stage. I think Pacific, that was probably one of the closest games to be able to win. But in this series, given BBL's form and a loss against Gentlemates, hypothetically, I think they bounce back and beat a Pacific pretty convincingly. And then Fnatic, Team Heretics, I'm gonna go for Fnatic. I think Fnatic personally has a chance to be able to make it into playoffs, but I think it's also, along with the Team Liquid, is some team that I'm concerned about potentially being bounced in playoffs, because like Team Liquid was throwing a lot of shit at the wall and Fnatic wasn't able to handle. Like, it wasn't shit in the literal sense, but I think shit as in like chaos. If Team Liquid know that, then that allows Team Liquid to press on the gas. And if teams keep pressing on the gas and Fnatic can't handle it, then that shows a lot of concerns for me. But in this scenario where Fnatic are playing Team Heretics, I think Team Heretics are in a bit of a lull. And so I think Fnatic be able to win this game pretty convincingly and allows them to maybe even see going into this third week that, okay, all of our decision making in roster changes, all of our decision making in game plan, VOD review, practicing, all of it has been a good stepping stone for how we're gonna set the stage for the rest of the year. Okay, For America's Week 3, we're going to go over Crew versus G2. Considering the fact that 100 Thieves banned Crew's Lotus in their previous game, and Crew was just a shell of themselves and not even close to being representative of a top 4 team, I think G2 take that advantage. They stray away from Lotus, even though they are a really good Lotus team, and I think they can beat them otherwise. I think they take advantage of that and pretty much expose Crew for, their lack of fundamentals, their lack of team play, and I guess, the lack of an experienced core top 4 team. But when it comes to some of the less experienced players, you can see that some of the team lacks the experience to be able to, adapt to multiple situations. If a team is throwing you off to new information that you're not, prepped for, or, you just haven't experienced before, experienced players know how to navigate it and know how to communicate in that. Again, in chaos, it shows how much people are able to thrive in the pressure, how much people are able to, adapt to new information. And 100 Thieves versus Sen, I think both of these teams are on a really good trajectory, but 100 Thieves are on a way higher trajectory versus Sen. But somehow, some way, through narrative wise or through some higher power, Sen always have been dominating 100 Thieves. And we say it's a rivalry, we'd say it's, El Clasico. And I think this follows the same narrative where 100 Thieves are a really great team, which is considerably a contrast compared to the last time they played, where they were kind of middle of the pack teams, or Sen was on the lower end, and somehow 100 Thieves kind of just throw a game against Sen. And this is very possible. This is a game where Sen are able to finally be, tested against a potential top 4 team in Americas. And so Sen end up winning this game. I wouldn't say pretty dominantly. I think this will for sure be a close game, considering that 100 Thieves have pretty much been streaking ever since their EWC win. Considering that they are champs and they have that pedigree, not in the same sense as a Masters or a champs, but given that the fact they've accomplished something, internationally, in terms of EWC, that allows them to be a weight lifted off their shoulder. And so that allows 100 Thieves to kind of step on the gas and be able to play a little bit more free. They don't have the pressure of being able to say, hey, we've done a lot, we practiced a lot, but we just haven't been able to make it. We haven't been able to show for ourselves. What are the results? We haven't had America's trophy. We haven't had any form of trophy. Finally, we have a trophy. So now we can play as a team that we're meant to be. So with that said, I'm high on 100 Thieves. I personally think that 100 Thieves could win against any other team, but given the fact that they haven't had good results against Sentinels historically, I'm gonna go for Sentinels. And then for Loud C9, I don't think they've shown anything that resembles, a good to middle of the pack roster. I think C9 have been on a downturn ever since their roster changes. Even their games or their stage last week showed some promise. They showed some really good ideas, but this squad just seems really dysfunctional. And I don't know if it's just a credit to the roster or to management or whatever, but their vibes just seem off, and it does not seem anywhere good of a tier 1 team. They don't even look like a great tier 2 team, which is crazy to say. Even tier 2 teams have some semblance of an identity. MIBR in a different scenario against a different roster, the completely different situation. I think that Furia isn't even close. But since Furia have had their roster changes, they have some pretty good ideas. And considering the fact that MIBR wasn't, completely able to dominate them in a 2-map series, I think that still doesn't push them over the edge as a favorable top 4 team. But with this game against the EG that has, again, shown some promise, they faced the Leviathan, again, reigning champs, it's very unlikely for them, very statistically unlikely for them to be able to win. And so MIBR, I think, are the favorite. I think personally I'll be rooting for EG just because I like the promise, I like the talent on their squad. I think that they can do a lot of great things, but against the MIBR, I think they should be really favored in this game. And Furia versus Envy, if Envy showed their last scoring, I don't even really want to get into it, but Envy looked like crap. And against a Furia that tested at MIBR and shows some really great promises, I think they just lack some polishing, some lacking, maybe some synergy within the team. I think that if they're able to fix it up, show some improvement on a week-to-week basis, then they could be really competitive. Not, anywhere maybe near a top 16, but I think they can be really competitive against a middle of the pack team and maybe even punch their way up. Energy versus Lev, this is the match of the week. Leviathan versus Energy. I think Leviathan are clearly favored. I think Lev are pretty much on a streak to be able to go undefeated and potentially make top 2 easily throughout the stage. They don't really have any competition against besides Energy that can pretty much be able to go par for them as terms of their dominance. And if it keeps working, don't fix it. C9 versus Crew, I think C9, given the fact that they are a semblance or not anywhere near of what they were in the previous stage or even this whole year, I think that Crew take advantage of that. Crew could potentially make a run, especially if they beat a G2, but given the fact that I don't think Crew is anywhere near the form where they once were, where they were considered one of the best teams in the world, given the fact they were, completely stopping a Sentinels team on Lotus, they're completely stomping, some other teams throughout Americas until they just kind of fell flat. Crew with their experience, with their roster, I think they convincingly beat a C9, and C9 looks like probably one of the worst teams in Americas. And the G2 versus Sentinels, given the fact that they both play a back-to-back, I think this game can be a 50-50. If Sentinels beat 100 Thieves pretty convincingly, I think that they have a real shot against G2 that haven't been like anywhere near their championship or their America's reigning form of constantly dominating America's narrative-wise. And I think it would be really great for the sport is Sentinels be able to go on a run, be able to clinch a spot and chance, and be able to compete as one of the top teams in Americas. Let me know your thoughts below. Let me know if I should change any of the predictions. Let me know if anything should flip the other way. Anything narrative-wise, we could talk about Envy, we could talk about Sentinels, we can talk about Leviathan, we can talk about Paper X. Anything, just let me know in the comments below. Subscribe, like. I'll see you in the next one.